and call the honourable member for Perth.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Acting Speaker. I couldn't disagree with the member for Banks more, and in fact he epitomises the problem of the current government and their misunderstanding, really, of the role that government does need to play in the development of a knowledge economy and an innovative community. Now, we do support this legislation, and we strongly support it, and we do recognise that amendments that we introduced in 2009, which were very important to protect the integrity of the taxation system, had an unintended consequence when it came to start-ups. And so we are acknowledging that this correction does need to take place. But I just want to put it on record that these very important integrity measures that were designed to ensure that the granting of share options to employees wasn't used as a rort in a more general sense, that those integrity measures have indeed been kept by this government. But we have acknowledged there was an unintended consequence, which was having an impact on the startup industry, on startups, and that we are prepared to acknowledge that and to support this legislation. But I want to reflect on the fundamental concepts that we see from the as we heard from the member for Banks, and that we've heard over and over again. And that is it really brings to the fore this very, very important question, and that is whether or not in the 21st century that a government does enough by ensuring that we have a macroeconomic environment and a legal and physical infrastructure that supports private sector funding, whether or not that is indeed enough for us to advance to a true 21st century innovative economy. And the fundamental view of our Conservative friends is that, yep, that's what we do. We provide the macroeconomics, we provide the physical infrastructure, we provide that legal framework, and as they love to say, and we just get out of the way. But really, that has proven to be an intellectually very, very primitive point of view, and not one that is going to see Australia becoming a technology maker rather than a technology taker. So if truly we are going to leverage off the intellectual and temperamental assets of Australians, and when I talk about the temperamental assets, I mean I guess the nature of Australians of being a bit iconoclastic, not being confined by, hidebound by tradition or traditional ways of thinking, but we are a community where people are encouraged to think for themselves, be different, create their own ideas, follow their own dreams. Then if we are going to leverage off that, government actually has to do more, and that is what international experience tells us. Now, recently, the Minister for Industry and Science, who probably is a little bit more ahead of the pack than the rest of the coalition, but even he acknowledged at a recent forum that Australia had come 81st out of 143 in the global innovation efficiency rates. Now, that is an index which records the comparative ability of nations to convert innovation inputs, that sort of education research, into innovation outputs. And he described that performance as average. I have to say I think it's considerably worse than average, because let's look at some of the countries that were rating more highly than Australia. And they include Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bulgaria, Thailand, and Costa Rica. Now, perfectly fine countries, I would imagine, in many ways, but not ones that need necessarily spring to mind as the leaders in innovation. But each of these rated more highly than we did in that ability to convert these fundamental inputs into real live operating business innovation. And so I think with all of the economic and cultural advantages that we have here in this country, that we should be seeing ranking 81st in the world as being something of a crisis and demanding urgent action, rather than there just being a few bland exhortations that we must do better, accompanied by budget settings that are in fact going to take us backwards rather than forwards. Now, a lot of this data there's been an unpacking of this data by Dr. Paul Jackson of Edith Cowan University in collaboration with the Humboldt Institute in Berlin and Cambridge University. And they've shown that while we do relatively well in education, R&D and institutional infrastructure, we do poorly in high business innovation performance. And they've done some analysis of why this might be. They've looked at whether or not we perhaps favour tax concessions over direct funding. And indeed, so that in many places this whole role of direct funding in other countries has a more central role in R&D than it has in Australia. And they looked at, and they also reflected upon the reduction of local level of high-tech procurement in defence spending, another way in which countries are able to drive the innovation within their local economies. And they also note that in Australia that we have a high degree of foreign ownership, and that in foreign companies that are foreign-owned within Australia invest very little in R&D. And they also looked at the other structural problem, and that was that Australian business had very, very low levels of business collaboration. So whether or not you were looking at the inter-business collaboration with suppliers and customers, or collaboration with universities and other institutes, our rate of business collaboration was some of the lowest in the OECD. So what's been the response of the current government to this? It's been a response that has sought to, that has cut back the level of scientists in the CSIRO, 800 job cuts from the scientists, so those important collaborations, scientists being embedded within industry, have been cut back. We've had, just in this last budget, another round of cuts to the CRCs, and the CRCs, the Cooperative Research Centres, are one of the ways that we do foster inter-business collaboration and collaboration between those networks of businesses with the scientist and the university. So the very instruments that we have that we should be beefing up, they are in fact reducing funding too. And we've got, the response seems to be, the just get out of the way mantra, accompanied by the idea that if we cut the wages, the penalty rates for baristas and waitresses, that somehow or other that's going to lead to a fluorescence of our economy. Can't see that. And that even in the current tradies tax incentives that were introduced, and whilst we are supporting that, we do recognise that under the current settings of the government that the economy has tanked, and that we do need a bit of a sugar hit to generate a bit more economic activity, so getting people going off and buying utes and coffee machines and ovens is going to provide a short-term economic boost. But I don't think any of us should think that this is going to be in any way a response that is going to produce a long-term sustainable 21st century industry. So a very short-sighted perspective from a government which, in my view, does not understand, cannot come to grips with what the true role of government is in the 21st century in creating industry engagement and industry policy. And I note there's been quite some very powerful analysis in Bloomberg Business about what is going to be the impact on Australia of our focus on a barista-led recovery. But I want to talk, and I noted the member for Banks picking up the conventional wisdom of the government in this area, and saying this is not about picking winners. That we can't get into this business of picking winners. Well, I want to say that in fact that the debate has to be a little bit more sophisticated than that, and I want to reference the work of Dr. Mariana Mazzucato, who's one of the very important writer in this area. And she talks about the need to see the state as a catalyst, the state as a lead investor, the state as having a role of sparking that initial reaction in a network that will cause knowledge to spread. So we need to get to an understanding of what the true nature of innovation is, and how indeed we can foster that. And we need to dispel some of the myths that it's all about venture capital getting together with these small startups, and that's going to make everything happen. Because in reality, that there are over and over again we can see strategic government intervention has been absolutely critical. Just take, for example, the Google algorithm. That algorithm that enabled the Google and its search engine to go out there and attract this massive private sector funding, that was funded initially under a National Science Foundation grant in the US. Likewise, most of the molecular antibodies which are that are fueling the biotech industry, they were funded initially through processes like the UK Medical Research Council, well before venture capitalists ever got involved. And many of the most innovative young companies in the USA were funded first not by private capital, but by public venture capital organisations such as the Small Business Innovation Research Centre. The US came to realise this after the Russians beat them with Sputnik and the first man in space, and they became very concerned that the industrial military complex wasn't producing the degree of innovation that they needed. So they changed tack. And they said, well, we're going to start funding now a lot more blue sky. We're going to go out there, we're going to fund people to come up with ideas. We're not going to have a success in every one. I mean, that's critical to this, to understanding that each of these won't be a success. But if we don't do this, we are not going to get anywhere. And where have we got an institution that really, we've set up a structure in the Australian arena, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. This has been a fantastic example of an enterprise, of a government organisation that has taken with a board, of a highly experienced commercial board, that's been able to make strategic interventions, funding a little bit of pure research, but mostly funding that early commercialisation phase where you take it from a laboratory concept up into something that is nearing the ability to attract private sector funding, and also providing some of that funding for implementation. Now, this has been a perfect example of what is being done in other countries, in those countries that are successful, those countries that come within the top 10 of the innovation conversion stakes. They have got governments that do it. It's done in the home of the free. In the United States, they are aggressively funding through their defence agencies, through their energy agencies, as well as through their small business agencies, funding this early stage of research and also this early stage of capitalisation. We are completely naive if we think embracing let's get out of the way, small government approach is in fact in this area going to be the thing that is going to bring home the bacon for Australia in the 21st century. We've got all of the talent and ability out there to do this. What we need is a government that is able to move beyond its narrow neocon ideology and actually understand why the countries are doing well, why the countries that are ranking other than 81st
Thank the member
are there.
for Perth for her contribution.